Have you ever been told that your lab results look fine, despite the fact that you don't feel fine? Of course, why else would you be seeing your doctor in the first place? I'm sure you've gone to the practitioner, had a bunch of labs done, and then you get your lab results back, and there really isn't anything that's popping out. Now, although that's good news because you don't have a major pathological issue, it may not account for why you feel the way you feel. And because of that, and because of not knowing what's actually causing the problem or where your doctors can actually turn to find a solution for you, you're kind of left high and dry. We see lots of patients that come into our practice that have gone through this experience, and what ends up happening is they're told for many years, sometimes decades, that everything looks fine, and then they later find out that something wasn't quite right. And it might be 5 to 7, even sometimes 10 years after the symptoms actually started. And it's because your practitioner, and of no fault of their own, but what they're looking for is a diagnosis and a label. And what that means is that you fulfill a certain set of criteria that somebody else has artificially created. I mean, let's face it, diseases are created by man. How we define diseases are created by man. And I was told this once by a gentleman named Dan Sullivan, and what he says is that whoever names the game owns the game, which means that if your medical system that you're using is in charge of naming the game, they get to define what that disease is classified as when certain numbers or results come in. And this is all based on their own criteria. So it has nothing to do with your personal health criteria. You could feel miserable, but if you don't meet the system's criteria, your results are going to be ignored until that occurs. And so what that means is that nothing can be done for you until you're in the later stages of the disease, because that's when the system defines your disease. And at that point, your options are actually quite limited. So what I would suggest is that if you're experiencing symptoms, if you're turning to practitioners and you're not finding really what the root cause is and what the issues are, or even if you've got a diagnosis, you're probably going to want to watch this video, because I'm going to take you through one of the most valuable tests that we use in our practice to help our patients decode where their health issues are starting and or stemming from. I'm going to show you a sample report from a urine test that we do on virtually every patient that helps us and helps them uncover what's happening in their body at a cellular level, because that's where all disease and dysfunction starts. Your organs are made up of cells, and so it's impossible for you to have a problem with an organ unless you first have a problem with the cells of that organ. Now, that cell is controlled by a variety of different things, including environmental inputs. We call this epigenetics. It's also connected to genetics, because yes, our genetics does play a role. It's also connected to nutrient status, to toxicity status, and hormones that regulate the function of the cell. But the cell itself has to be doing its job properly. So we do a test called an organic acids test, and this is done through a single sample urine collection. And I'm going to show you some of the amazing information that we can uncover using this test, and how it can clue us into where the problem is starting in your cells, so that it doesn't manifest in the organ to then later be diagnosed many years down the road by our traditional medical system. So let's go through this test so that you can get a better idea of why and how functional lab testing is so important and so vital and so critical to addressing issues after they've started or been diagnosed, or for looking for issues that haven't even developed or are unnameable and unclassifiable by our current medical establishment. When you have a diagnosis for a disease or an illness, it's pretty late in the process. This testing will help us identify where these problems are coming from much earlier in the process. So let's take a peek at the lab test, and I hope it gives you some insights and inspires you to at least get some testing done so that you can see where your cells stand. Now, here's a cool thing to note too. If you feel amazing, that doesn't exclude you from getting the testing done. That's actually a great time to get this type of testing done, because we can actually take a snapshot of your biochemistry and what it looks like when you feel great, so that down the road, if you don't feel so hot, we can figure out how to recalibrate your system and get you back to that baseline, if you will. So it's always good to get functionally tested, because you can see where you stand, you can see the trajectory that you're moving in, and a lot of times we can correlate early symptom presentation to cell dysfunction instead of waiting until it develops into a disease state in the liver, or in an organ or in a system later on down the road. So let's look at this lab test and see what we find. The first page is a great summary, a high-level summary of what the lab interpretation is based on the computer's input. Now, we always want to take lab testing into consideration with the patient's history. So the history is critical because we want to look at this with a certain lens. We want to know how the patient's presentation correlates with their cellular presentation. Now, what's interesting to note is, as is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. And what that means is the function of the smallest level of your body, which is the cells, the smallest unit of life in your body is the cells, is going to be related to your overall health. Every function that your body has, your cell also has. So just keep that in mind. Your cells are essentially a mini representation of the whole, and cells come together to make up your entire body. Now, as we go through this second page, we see a summary of abnormal findings. The first section looks at fat metabolism. The next section looks at carbohydrate metabolism. We look at things like energy production markers, B vitamin status. B vitamins are very important for energy production, brain function, nervous system function. There's a lot of reasons why we need healthy B vitamin status. We also look at methylation cofactors. This is related to detoxification, antioxidant production, neurotransmitter production, and the production of many other cofactors and nutrients that the body needs to function properly. We also look at neurotransmitter metabolism, and the way we do this is by measuring breakdown products in the urine. The way organic acid testing is collected is by evaluating waste products that are found in the urine as a result of biochemistry. Much like looking through somebody's garbage at the end of the week, for example, could clue you into their diet, into whether they're eating takeout or not, or whether they're preparing food at home or not, what magazines that person subscribes to. Starting to sound creepy here, but what I mean is you can look at somebody's waste products to understand what is going on inside the biochemistry. So we can take a look into somebody's home by looking in their garbage, which is on the corner of the street there. We also look at oxidative damage. We look at detoxification markers, so we can see how efficiently the system is getting rid of waste products. And we also look at bacterial overgrowth and yeast and fungal overgrowths. This can show up in the urine as well, because waste products from the digestive system may get into our system, which is then flushed out by the kidneys. So as we go through the rest of the pages, what you'll see are color-coded markers that make it really easy for not only the practitioner to see where you are at a glance, but for you to see where you are at a glance as well. What we see with this sample patient is the inability to efficiently metabolize fat. So this person might expect low energy, they might expect weight gain, they might expect that it's easy for them to gain fat, difficult for them to lose fat. They might describe that they have energy for very short periods of time, but their long-term endurance is not very good. So this is what we might see. We also see that this person, based on their carbohydrate metabolism, is probably insulin resistant. So now they can't metabolize glucose properly and they can't metabolize fat properly. So this person is going to have major issues with their energy production systems. And we see that here. So we start seeing that their mitochondria, which is the little engines inside of our cells that help the cell function and metabolize the cell, if you will, is not working properly. The smallest little units of energy in our body are called ATP, and they are made from the interaction of our carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, if you will, and oxygen, which then go through the mitochondria, which are then turned into ATP, which is the usable form of energy. And so you can imagine that this person is going to have an issue with energy. They can't utilize fat for energy properly, they're insulin resistant, and even if we were to put the nutrients and cofactors into their mitochondria that are required for energy production and metabolism, they lack the proper cofactors. So that's why we're seeing these metabolic waste products show up in the urine. The next section that we look at looks at B vitamin status, and it also looks at methylation cofactors. This is all to say that these play an important role in our neurological function, in our energy metabolism, in our detoxification pathways, in our neurotransmitter production pathways, in our antioxidant systems. So we need proper methylation and B vitamin levels to make the chemicals that make us feel good and to get rid of the waste products that make us feel terrible. As we go into the next section, we start to see cell regulatory markers. Now, in this section, what we're looking at is the waste products of neurotransmitter metabolism. Now, most of this neurotransmitter metabolism takes place in the gut because that's where most of your neurotransmitters are. There's no way to accurately measure neurotransmitter status in the brain besides doing a biopsy, and that would not be a good way to do it. So what we can do, you're looking at the client's history and looking at their clinical presentation, we can see if their stress hormones are out of balance, if the neurotransmitter that helps them stay happy, called serotonin, is in balance, or if their motivation might be on the lower side or compromised because they have low dopamine. We can look at these things to see what's going on. We can also look at cytokines, and cytokine activity tells us about the inflammatory assault that's taking place as a result of chronic inflammation that we see is persistent in a lot of patients. The next section looks at oxidative damage, so we can see if there's damage to the cell or the mitochondria that's taking place, and this oxidative damage damages our DNA. The other section we look at are detoxification section, and that detoxification section tells us how efficiently somebody is getting rid of toxicity from their body, especially in their liver. So we're looking at phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification. And what this means is that this person here in particular has very compromised elimination pathways. So supporting this person's liver can be very, very beneficial. And we can support them with sulfur-containing amino acids, things like magnesium, B vitamins, and other cofactors that can help this person metabolize these toxins out of their body. The next section looks at compounds of bacterial and yeast overgrowth. Waste products from our bacteria accumulate in our blood, then are filtered out by our kidneys, and will show up in the urine if this is in fact a problem. So we can see if somebody's digestive system is in some way compromised with something like a SIBO or another type of bacterial overgrowth or even a fungal overgrowth that's taking place. So this type of lab testing gives you so much insight. It looks at 9 systems in your body that help us determine metabolism, help us determine vitamin status for B vitamins especially. We look at neurotransmitters, we look at methylation, we look at detoxification, and we look at bacterial markers in the gut. So one test from one sample gives us an amazing snapshot into what's going on in your cells, and then if we can correct the function in the cells, then not only do we get a benefit in whatever system is compromised with your health, but we get a global benefit because every single cell in your body except red blood cells has mitochondria. The highest concentration of mitochondria are actually in the brain and in the heart because those organs work overtime and they're working all the time constantly. They never really get much of a break. So this is a very important information, very critical to your long-term health and happiness, and also looking further down the road, very critical testing to help you feel your best and take evasive measures from developing chronic illnesses. I recommend this testing annually to my patients. I get it done every 6 months because I like to stay on top of it a little bit. And I found some interesting thing on my results. And guess what? As life circumstances change, as our environments change, if we move into a new home, if we get a new job or move into a new building, if we get a brand new car, our cell function starts to change, and that can be measured and quantified on a test like this. This is not the type of information that your doctor is looking for. So it's not about being a better doctor. It's about asking different questions and looking under different rocks to find out what's actually going on. And hopefully we can find these things much earlier before they're detected by conventional medicine, because at that point, your options, although not completely limited, become a little bit more limited when you're at that stage in the game. Of course, your body's capable of healing, regenerating, and repairing. So tapping into the cells and how they function is your best way to stay well, but also to get well regardless of what condition you're in. I hope this video helps. I hope it gives you some insights. I hope it inspires you to dig a little bit deeper when it comes to your health. If you haven't had an organic acid test done, don't ask your doctor, because if they knew anything about this test, they would have done it already. Find somebody who's interpreted hundreds of these, because that's how many it takes to start getting good at them, and find somebody who's going to listen to your story to help you get to the bottom of it. If you can't find somebody locally, we're happy to help you or to work with you remotely to get this testing done, because we know how important and vital it is to your health. And I hope that at some point you're able to get this testing done so you can see how important and vital it is to your ultimate health as well. Once again, this is Sachin Patel with the Living Proof Institute. Hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please list them below. Thank you.